Hey, what's going on, Fantasy Flavor podcast listeners, viewers, YouTube channel viewers potentially? What's up? My name is Dylan Thomas here, one of the hosts of the Fantasy Flavor podcast, and I'm joined alongside Drew here. He's going to be our special guest. How you doing?
I'm doing well, man.
Good to hear. And definitely with these quarantine times, it can be a little chaotic, if you will. So glad you're doing well. So.
Yeah, how about you?
I'm bored. Bored as could be. Not why I have you on, but why I've been podcasting and doing fantasy football stuff. We're nothing else better to do. But
Gotcha.
So if you do want to find Drew, you can find him on Twitter at DFBeanCounter. That link will also be in the description, as well as other links we talk about throughout this video. So awesome. So my first question for you is kind of like, what do you do involving Dynasty Fantasy Football?
I do a lot of like prospect evaluations, and then I also do a fair bit of kind of game theory type of research, usually involving ADP trends and things of that nature. So that's pretty much what all my content is around.
Okay, yeah, awesome. And I believe, since I already know this answer, but for the listeners or viewers, you do a lot of data. Kind of, it's not really as much film driven as it is data, numbers, and analytics.
Yeah, I don't watch any film.
You watch football games though, right? Just not as much film.
Not so much.
Mm-hmm.
I've watched one college football game in my entire life.
But do you watch the NFL?
I watched the second half of Red Zone on Sundays.
All right, yeah.
Scott Hansen. Well, my kids now.
I respect it. All right, so I just want to kind of break down your Bulletproof Prospect series. You kind of already talked about it a little bit before. Can you just kind of give an explanation of what it is to our listeners or viewers?
Yeah, sure. So basically, I have this process. It's called the Bulletproof Prospect process, and I go through different metrics that are proven to be predictive of future success. And I look at each one, applying context if there is context to apply to each individual metric, and then roll it all together into an overall grade.
All right, awesome. And that's how I actually found out about you. And that's something I really want to talk about a lot here on the podcast. This 2020 class, super duper hyped. I believe you said, I can't remember the number exactly. You had a ton of, how many Bulletproof prospects are there in this class?
I think there's 14.
How many were last class for perspective?
7.
Sheesh. So, depending on how big your league is, you could get a bulletproof guy regardless of where you're drafting the first round, even early second. So that's awesome. And some of the guys here I want to cover, honestly, just scratch that. What I want to kind of talk about first is, before we talk about names, I know each process is different for the Bulletproof, but how do you kind of go about it? I kind of want a little more detail. I know like what kind of stats do you kind of use, what analytics?
Which position do you want to talk about?
Let's talk about the running backs and wide receivers, if we could do those two.
Okay. So running backs, the main things I look for is I want to, the whole premise of this is that we're looking for players with safe floors or that have a chance to hit. So we're looking for players that have, and beyond that, then we're looking for players with high ceilings. That's the second part of it. So the first part of it is we're looking for players that are big enough. So usually we're looking for somebody that's at least like 205 pounds plus, and then we want them to be athletic. So usually a sub 4.6 is what we're looking for. There are exceptions, like Kareem Hunt was a pretty terrific prospect, even though he ran a 4.6. Things like that. And then after that, then I look at production. So I'm looking for market share. I never use counting stats. Counting stats are a reflection of volume and a reflection of situation. I just steer away from counting stats. They provide a lot of false positives. So when I'm looking at market share, I look at market share of rush yards, which is probably the least impactful thing that I look at. All that really tells me is that a player has handled a large workload in the past and that their coaches wanted to give them the ball. And then the big thing that I look at with running backs, because I'm really chasing ceiling at running back, is market share of receiving yards. The top players in fantasy football always have strong receiving backgrounds, other than like Derrick Henry last year, which was unusual to be such a powerhouse. But he had an unusual season, like that happens. The rest of the running backs that were good, most of them had quality receiving backgrounds. And the elite ones, like Saquon Barkley and Christian McCaffrey, Dalvin Cook, those guys all have elite receiving backgrounds in college. So that's the big one I'm looking at from market share of receiving yards. Beyond that, we're looking for, draft capital is another one. If a player is drafted on day 3, I just crossed them off the list. I'm just really not interested. We see very, very few hits in day 3. But so then in terms of efficiency, I do not use yards per carry because it is not a running back stat. Yards per carry is highly influenced by offensive line, by play calling, by men in the box, situational. There's just way too many external factors that can impact yards per carry. The metric that I use is Graham Barfield's yards created metric. It basically cuts out the offensive line, so you can just compare players from what they created after the offensive line blocked for them. So you get more of an apples to apples picture. So like a player like Ronald Jones had a really high yards per carry. I think it was 6+ in college. But when you peel it back, most of his yards were coming as a result of blocking. He was very poor at creating yards for himself. Saquon Barkley, on the other hand, had not a very good offensive line and then still created a ton of yards, as you would expect. That's more or less what I'm looking at with efficiency. And then, you roll it all together and see what the total picture looks like.
Yeah, awesome. I mean, that was really in-depth there. And a lot of the things you use are pretty easy to find. A lot of it's on Player Profile or Graham Barfield's yards created pages. All of them, I believe, are currently free on fantasypoints.com. You can find market share data.
That's correct.
I believe Zeno is my name. So that's another website. So all these are kind of free too. So for any listener or viewer out there, I've used these before in the past and they're free. So it's not like you have thousands of dollars you're spending on this. A lot of this, is free content and you can use in your analysis too. So my first question, since we're on the topic of running backs, there's kind of a consensus top 5 among the community. My first question for you is that top 5 your top 5 too, or is it because you do something a little bit niche that maybe one guy kind of falls out and it's more of like a top 4 or a top 3?
I do have the same top 5, but Clyde Edwards-Helaire isn't really, like, he wasn't in the same tier as the other 4 until he got drafted by Kansas City. That bumped him up. He doesn't have a bulletproof grade from me. He's a mediocre prospect from my perspective. But landing in Kansas City is a pretty nice.
Yeah, round 1 too. I mean, those round 1 running backs get used a ton. I believe 240 touches on average their rookie seasons. So if he averages that in that offense, I mean, it's going to be an absolute freak of nature to see him produce, or any good running back. We've seen so many good running backs produce in Kansas City.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that makes sense to me why Clyde is, though. He kind of fills in more. I'm a little higher on him because I don't, like, we kind of have similar processes, but for me, draft capital means so much to me just because of that indicative of usage. And I feel like with running backs, you talked about this with like Rashad Penny, not this offseason, but the offseason before. You're like, if running back kind of face plant immediately, it's in, even wide receivers, we'll get into that a little bit later, it's just a bad sign. So that's why I like drafting running backs early, because you know what you have, and they seem ultimately safer. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like most of the running backs I draft at least end up hitting. Meanwhile, wide receivers a mess.
Yeah, like if you look at ADP trends over the past decade or so, it's actually really close in terms of busts in the first round of the dynasty rookie drafts. Running backs and wide receivers are pretty much equivalent in terms of did this player lose value or not. The difference, though, is that running backs actually produce in their first year and wide receivers don't. Wide receivers gain value based on projected future production, whereas running backs gain value based on real, tangible, win your fantasy league right now production. So I'm a pro running back in rookie drafts kind of guy. In the first round, in the second round, that completely flips. I want nothing to do with the second round running backs. I'm all in on the second round wide receivers.
So is Keyshawn Vaughn? He's been kind of one of the most polarizing prospects here. Would you take him first round then with that kind of mentality of running backs?
No.
Out on the Vaughn train. Not happening.
Hard pass.
I already knew that was coming. I don't know why I'm shocked.
He's okay. Like he's a fine running back, but I'm not taking him over any of the good wide receivers.
That's definitely fair to say. So who is your kind of your favorite? It doesn't necessarily have to be your number. I mean, if it is your number one, maybe it makes sense because it's your favorite. Which ones of those top 5 running backs are your favorite?
Cam Akers is my favorite. He's my running back one. He's my 101.
Oh my gosh. We need to play more leagues together. I'm just giving you a little bit of crap. Can you explain why? Defend yourself. I'm giving you a chance to defend yourself. Defend yourself.
Well, Cam Akers was my running back 2 going into the draft. He was tied with Jonathan Taylor. I thought they were both great. Deandre Swift was actually my running back 1 going in. But when so Jonathan Taylor landed in Indianapolis, obviously, right? A lot of people are in love with that landing spot. I get it. He's a skill fit. He's a great inside runner. They have good inside blocking. No questions. Quinton Nelson is probably one of the best players in football, regardless of position. The issue for me is that they have Marlon Mack, he was good last year. He wasn't bad. He was good, if not at very worst, he was average. He had, 1,000 yards or so, if I recall correctly. And then they still have Nyheim Hines, who had a bunch of targets last year. Then they drafted Jonathan Taylor, which was like, that's kind of weird. Where, are they just going to bench Marlon Mack? I can't see it. They didn't bench Wilkins last year. He still saw a fair bit of carries. So if Jonathan Taylor basically steps into Marlon's back role, I don't know that you get much of a better season than Marlon Mack had. From Cam Akers' perspective, we have a player who is going to be competing with guys who were complete nobodies last year. Darrel Henderson was a 3rd-round pick. He did nothing. He barely saw the field. I understand that he was okay when he saw the field, but guys that don't get to play just aren't that good usually. They played Malcolm Brown over him, who we know is objectively completely replaceable. So Cam Akers is walking into a situation where he can be the best running back on the team out of the gate. He can be the best. Well, he is the best receiver on the team out of the gate. So he's walking into a 3-down role. So if I think the players are roughly equivalent in terms of skill, and then he gets a 3-down role in year 1, and we're hoping Jonathan Taylor does at some point, I'm just going to go with the guy that's getting it now, or the guy that I'm projecting to get it now anyway.
Okay, yeah, that definitely makes sense. Sorry, I kind of poked at you there a little bit. I wasn't trying to be an asshole or anything.
It's all good.
Yeah, I love Cam Akers too. I might, out of all these rookie running backs, I have the most shares of Cam Akers too, because honestly, they're all so close for me personally that whoever's kind of going the cheapest among the community, I think is like the best value because they're all that close.
Absolutely. I actually have what do I have? 5 copies of Cam Akers, and let me tell you, 1 second. I have 5 copies of Cam Akers, 3 of Deandre Swift, 2 of J.K. Dobbins, and 1 of Jonathan Taylor.
All right, I see.
So yeah, I tried to get a mix, but I was not picking at 1 or 2 very often, so I didn't get Jonathan Taylor or Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I ended up getting Jonathan Taylor at 104 in the one league that I did get.
Okay, that makes
sense. It's a super flex league, so.
Those quarterback truthers out there, whether that's right or wrong, we'll get into that later. But who's kind of not talked about among the top 5? Deandre Swift. I believe you loved him too, and he was drafted earlier than Cam Akers. So, in with the bulletproof prospects here, you didn't mention situation mattering. You only mentioned draft capital, and Deandre Swift has higher draft capital. So why is Deandre Swift lower than Cam Akers?
Because Deandre Swift isn't stepping into a 3-down role. He's likely going to have to share with Kerryon Johnson. Kerryon Johnson wasn't a complete nobody last year. He was used heavily when he was playing. He was used heavily as a rookie. I think he had a number 12 opportunity share or something like that when he was a rookie. So, like, I just don't project players to be tossed aside when they've been established in the past. I have no issue tossing aside players that have never done anything in the past. That's the big difference there. The bulletproof prospect process, by the way, it doesn't, like, Clyde Edwards-Helaire he's not bulletproof. He's still not bulletproof. He just moved up my rankings, that's all. The bulletproof prospect grade is pre-draft, and then it changes for draft capital. If a player falls out of the day 2, then I knock him out of the bulletproof range. If a player surprisingly gets picked on day 2, then I might bump him into the bulletproof range.
All right, that's a great answer. That was kind of what I was hoping for. So my question is then, how much does your own process kind of matter in your rankings then? Because if they're not identical, which is fine, I don't think they should be identical. I think that'd be a big problem if they were. But how much do you use that process in your own rankings? Heavily? Yeah.
Heavily.
Okay, I figured.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Like the 4 bulletproof running backs are ahead of Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Mm. I just can't justify putting a player that I don't think is in the same tier ahead of someone else because of situations. Situations change way too fast in the NFL. Like, I'm not even 100% certain that Clyde Edwards-Helaire is going to get a huge workload. He might be a Theo Riddick this year. I don't know. Like, Damian wasn't terrible last year. He was okay when he played. So it's hard to just say he's going to get a huge workload. I get the average workload for first-round running backs for sure, but he was a 32nd pick. Like, one pick later, and he's a second-rounder. So he's not on the same plane as, like, a top 5 pick like Saquon Barkley or Ezekiel Elliott. Like, he's not – it's not comparable. If that makes sense.
Nobody's saying, second overall compared to 32nd overall is the same thing. It has to mean more the earlier you're drafted.
I just mean in terms of workload, definitely. Right? Mm-hmm. Like, we know they're players, but from a workload perspective, I wouldn't expect them to walk into here's every touch kind of situation.
So are those 5 running backs, those 4 running backs, because Clyde isn't bulletproof, are those all the bulletproof running backs, or am I missing an AJ Dillon? No, AJ Dillon?
No.
Some guys like AJ Dillon, some guys don't. He's a Massachusetts native.
He's absolutely appealing from a Derrick Henry type archetype, big and fast, and and he dominated. It's just that he literally didn't catch passes.
That's definitely true. Didn't create much on his own.
When I'm looking, and he didn't create much on his own. And when I'm looking for running backs, I want guys that project for that 3-down role. I want the elite ceiling. I want the Dalvin Cooks and the. Surprisingly, Leonard Fournette has that same kind of profile. He was an absolute dynamite. Shouldn't say dynamite. He was an absolute volume receiver in college, which not a lot of people realize.
Leonard Fournette. Oh, God. That's an interesting player in his own right. I mean, I'm probably a little lower on Fournette. I was all in the Fournette train last year. I sold all my shares. I am Fournette free. I need a t-shirt that says that.
I don't think it was a bad idea to sell after last year. I didn't, but I completely understand the idea.
You should get off the train. I mean, free agent next year, Chris Thompson, and he's going to steal. He had 80 receptions. That's going down.
I just want the volume.
All right, we'll see. I think it completely just falls off a cliff next. We've been waiting for Tom Brady to fall off the cliff. Leonard Fournette might fall off the cliff before Tom Brady does.
He could.
We'll have to see there. But I kind of want to move on here to the wide receivers. You don't necessarily have to talk about what you grade here for the bulletproof prospect for the wide receiver. Obviously on your Twitter, we know some of the obvious stuff like the breakout ages, the market share of yards. We've seen that in your Twitter threads there in the past at DFBeanCounter. So I just kind of you've made a few articles on a few guys, and I kind of want to talk about these few guys, if that's okay with you.
Sure. Yeah.
We're a little negative, so let's start off positive. And let's talk about one of your favorite kind of sleeper pick. This is everybody's sleeper pick. I don't know how much we're sleeping anymore, but Bryan Edwards, why do you like him so much?
because he's fantastic. It's funny that you say he's a sleeper pick because literally he's everyone's sleeper pick. Like nobody's asleep on Bryan Edwards, but yet he's going so late because the draft is so deep. So yeah, Bryan Edwards, he obviously broke out at like 17.9, which is insane. What's interesting about that is that he was actually playing with Deebo Samuel and Hayden Hurst at the time, which is pretty incredible that a 17-year-old walked into a team with substantially older players. Deebo, I think, is 3 years older, and Hurst is 4 or 5 years older. And he immediately commanded targets in a passing game that featured much older, highly drafted players. That's incredible. And then he went toe-to-toe with Deebo, who, again, is 3 years older, or 2.5 to 3 years older. I don't remember the exact number. But went toe-to-toe with Deebo every year he was in college, which is, again, very incredible. And the issue with Edwards is that we don't know what he is. He never tested at the Combine. He never played at the Senior Bowl. He basically is a complete black box. But if we go back to his high school recruiting, which is really all we have, unfortunately, he ran, I believe it was a 4.5 at around the same size, 6'3", 212, or somewhere in that ballpark. So unless he got slower, which I think is unlikely as a player matures and gets stronger, he's probably still running around a 4.5, which at 6'3" and 212 is very, very exciting. The other thing I like about Edwards is that he is that big body receiver that absolutely profiles as an alpha in his passing game in the NFL. Regardless of where he landed, he had the profile to be one of those target monsters. And that is the ceiling that I covet. So I really like Bryan Edwards.
Yeah, I mean, Bryan Edwards, like I said, everyone's sleeper pick. Everyone likes Bryan Edwards. I mean, the most common take is Henry Ruggs, maybe a better real life player than a fantasy player, and Henry Ruggs, he's going to take over the wide receiver core in 3 years. So I like it. I'm a Bryan Edwards guy myself. So it, he's an awesome player.
I'm gonna share with you something a little bit spicy. I have Bryan Edwards ranked on my rankings on Patreon as wide receiver 29 right now.
Oh, okay. Wow. Can we get some context of maybe a surprising guy or two you have ranked over, where Bryan Edwards is ranked higher than, if you know what I mean?
DK Metcalf, Terry McLaurin, Deebo Samuel.
That's spicy. So are you taking him a first round of rookie draft then? Bryan Edwards?
No, I always draft players at ADP. I just trade back until I can get them.
I mean, have you missed out on a share of a player because you've done that trio course?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I have, but I try to stay within tiers, right? Like I have, what is it, 7 or I think 7, 8? No, I don't remember. I have a whole bunch of bulletproof wide receivers this year. So instead of picking one at 109, I just trade back to 203 and take the one that's left.
Yeah.
Whatever one it may be. So I've got a couple of LaViscas, I've got a couple Edwards, I've got, I think, one Justin Jefferson, one Jalen Reagor. I don't have any Judy or Lamb, which is kind of disappointing though.
Yeah, I mean, you're missing out on those top guys. Dang, I mean, I have some Reagor. I need more Lamb shares too myself. I don't think I have one, and it's sad because I actually traded a Lamb share I had for Julio. That was hard contending, which I can get behind that. I hear he's pretty okay. I don't know.
He's all right. You're into big, dominating with incredible track records. The guy's never not been a wide receiver one in points per game. Never not been a wide receiver one.
It's crazy even as a rookie. He doesn't score touchdowns either, which is really weird because of how big he is. But it's awesome to see. Super safe guy there. But now here's an interesting name that I find. This is one. See, it's interesting because you're kind of a data guy, but some of your takes don't line up. For example, Player Profiler loves Denzel Mims. Okay, that whole community, Denzel Mims is their Chris Godwin. Okay, they're praying to their Jesus, they're Chris Godwin. Okay, but you took a stand. What's wrong with Denzel Mims, man?
Well, Denzel Mims has basically so he entered college and he played with a couple of guys that were fringe NFLers. Ishmael Zamora, who is basically a nothing in the NFL. He didn't. I don't think he got drafted, if I recall correctly. And I can't remember the other guy's name, but also like fringe NFLer. He was there for a while, but didn't do anything. And Mims literally didn't do anything. Like he just didn't have any reception. Like he basically didn't register as an 18-year-old, which is kind of weird when he's on such a weak depth chart. Usually, if it's a weak depth chart, we see good players have some impact. Then he played at age 19, and he was good. He kind of knocked it out of the park. And then at age 20, Jalen Hurd joined the team. Jalen Hurd was a running back. He switched to wide receiver. And in his first season ever playing wide receiver, he put Mims to shame, which is just bizarre. And then he went in the third round. It's not like he was a crazy high pick. Like he was a good pick, but he wasn't a first rounder by any means. Mm-hmm. So a guy playing wide receiver for the first time in his life just completely outproduced Mims. It's just weird. Like it doesn't feel right. And then Hurd obviously went to the NFL, got drafted. And then in Mims' final season, he didn't do anything again. Like he was good on his team, but he wasn't that good. He didn't even meet the regression line, which is just really weird. And he doesn't have any good teammates. So he just never, anytime he was presented with NFL talent on his depth chart, he lost to them every time.
Yeah, I mean, that's concerning considering he's kind of going to this place I hear is called the NFL. I mean, if you can't be on NFL talent and you're going to the NFL, it might be a little bit of a problem. So that's definitely a spicy take because he has the breakout age, the college dominator, probably hyped, propped up because of touchdowns. So I'm just remembering the box score numbers, right?
Yeah, and he had a really good age 19 season, and he had one good season. That's essentially what it comes down to. That's why I don't like him. He had one good season in college, and that's it. And it was with nobody's on the roster. Like, literally, guys I've never heard of.
Yeah, definitely a little surprising there. I kind of have a fun question for you. So we're actually going to play kind of like a little game here. I was kind of okay. So what I'm going to do is you actually probably haven't done Bulletproof Prospect. This is a real prospect, by the way. I'm kind of curious what you're thinking with this guy, okay?
Okay.
So it's going to be a wide receiver.
Okay.
I'm just kind of curious from a market share of yard standpoint here. This is what I want to talk about. So he redshirts his freshman year. And so we're looking at the baseline regression. He kind of has like a meh sophomore year, okay? So, so meh second year. Okay, redshirts his freshman year, doesn't even play. His first year kind of meh, kind of the baseline regression, excuse me. He has a good junior year, and he hasn't had his senior year yet. But let's say he has a good senior year too, and he's above that line. Is that good or bad for the Bulletproof Prospect series? Mediocre.
Mediocre. Was he above the regression line at 19?
I actually don't even know this guy's age. I was just looking into my Devy rankings, and I'm like, huh.
Oh, fair enough.
Marion Terry out of Florida State.
Oh, I like that guy.
You like him?
Love that guy.
I don't actually know his age. I was wondering that because, like, I know
he's older
because he could have declared this year. I believe AJ Brown had a breakout age of above 20 though, and he was bulletproof, right? So it
but I was going to say there's kind of a weird trend. If a player basically, so AJ Brown's first year was when he was 19, and he was slightly below the regression line, which is not great, but it was his first year, and then And he was playing with Evan Engram, who was a first-round tight end, obviously. A really, really good one. And then when he was 20, without Evan Engram, and only with, like, DK Metcalf and DeMarcus Lodge, was that the guy's name? I think so. So then A.J. Brown immediately shot to the top of the leaderboard in that offense, and it wasn't close. Like, he completely dominated that offense. And then the next year, he did the same thing. It was like, well, we can maybe give him a pass because Evan Engram was a senior and one hell of a tight end. And I can understand why he maybe didn't produce in his very first year at age 19, but then he immediately dominated as soon as Evan Engram was gone.
Mm-hmm.
So
okay,
not so
thank
bad.
you. I was interested on how to kind of value like Tamarion Terry specifically. I was kind of looking, getting my Debbie rankings ready, and I was kind of like, is this good? Obviously, he hasn't produced the senior year yet, so maybe we could look back in the year he's the next Denzel Mims, like quite literally the next Denzel Mims.
Yeah, I mean, he's quite a bit over the regression in his second and third years, I believe, like substantially over. I think his last year he had about 930 yards, and the next closest was about 330 yards last season. It wasn't close.
Yeah. So even if it wasn't the best, he like dominated the share. Yeah, Florida State. Yeah. I hear it's not the best football program at the moment. No offensive line.
Yeah, it's a little bit sketchy. Cam Akers might have been the best quarterback on that team.
Should have had him throw more. So I kind of, is it worth talking about tight ends? Is there any tight end you like at all?
No,
no Komet, no Adam Trotman. All right, quarterbacks.
Mm-hmm. No. Yeah. If I'm picking a tight end, I'll give you one. If I'm picking a tight end, I'm going after Dalton Keene in the 4th round.
Okay, Dalton Keene. It reminds me of a Kahale Waring or whatever. Kahale Waring. Yeah.
Kinda, yeah. He's an above-average athlete. He had good-ish stats in college. I had never heard of him until New England drafted him. He was a 3rd-round pick, so all that stuff is good. And he's got a killer mustache. If you haven't seen this picture on Player Profile,
I've seen the Rambo himself. So definitely interesting there. Thank you. Mm-hmm. But I want to move on here to the last position, quarterback. Sure. How many of the quarterbacks do you like in this draft class? 2.
2
is probably one of them. See what I did there?
2 is one of them.
And the second one is probably Jordan Love, right? No, I'm kidding. It's Joe Burrow.
Definitely Joe Burrow. Actually, I had Tua ranked ahead of Joe Burrow right up until the draft, until after the draft. I'm a little bit afraid of Joe Burrow's floor, like the fact he was a 6th-round pick coming into his senior year when he was he 22 or 23 for most of his year?
He's currently 23, I believe.
He's old anyway. So he was an older player in the college football, and then suddenly he just started to be awesome. And that's just a little bit scary. Like, you don't normally see players go from nothing to awesome. He was like, the highs were incredible though. Like, there's no way that you can look at what he did and say he's not good. Like, he was good. It's just what happened the first few years of his college career. So I always had 2 ahead of him. And then when the draft happened, and I expected the Dolphins to load up on skill players along with Tua. I thought they were going to take a wide receiver in the 1st or 2nd round. I expected them to take a running back at some point. I was hoping they would take a bunch of O-linemen, and some of that came true. But they just didn't surround him with any like actual good skill players. Preston Williams is an undrafted free agent that had a good 7 or 8 game stretch. He might be good. We don't know. Devontae Parker flamed out of the NFL basically for his first 4 years. And then after Williams went down, Parker suddenly got good. Mike Gesicki completely face planted in his rookie year, and then he had like 4 targets a game up until Preston Williams got hurt. And then he took off after Preston Williams got hurt. And it just kind of makes you think, if this undrafted rookie wide receiver can step onto the team and make these other 2 guys irrelevant, how good are they? I don't know. So I don't love the weapons in Miami, and I do love the weapons in Cincinnati. I think Tyler Boyd's one of the top slot receivers in the league. I think A.J. Green, if he's healthy, is clearly one of the top X receivers in the league. And there are very few better field stretchers than John Ross. Like, he's just so fast. Teams have to respect his speed. Whether they would throw the ball to him or not doesn't matter. He's opening up everything else for everyone else. And then Joe Mixon is a complete stud, so you just can't go wrong. So when Miami didn't do anything to address the skill positions, I was like, you know what? I'm just going to go with the better situation. I have the players fairly even. let's just go with the situation on this
I
one.
mean, that'll matter too, because maybe if Burrell balls out and Tua, coming off that injury, maybe he rests a few games and comes off late in the season. Maybe you could sell Burrow back for Tua plus and maybe a super flex league. One quarterback, I don't see quarterbacks being swapped that much, but
no, I completely agree. Quarterbacks are pretty irrelevant. I typically don't take one in the first, well, definitely not in the first round, and usually not in the second round unless all the other good players are gone. But in my few single quarterback leagues, the good players seem to still be available when the good quarterbacks are going. So I usually just take the players.
I took one share of Tua in a one quarterback league, the 206. I was rocking like Daniel Jones, Aaron Rodgers. I'm like, could use an upgrade. I was pretty loaded at other positions, so I said, sure, why not? Definitely, I think they're close. It'll be cool to see though if like Tua, I believe they Tua 2 firsts. Dolphins do next year. I don't remember if they have 2 seconds. I think it might only be 1. And it's a super great wide receiver class next year, so maybe that's where Tua gets his new skill position, at least at wide receiver.
Yeah, that's for sure. That's what I was trying to talk myself into. But I used to think the Colts were just an incredible drafting team. I thought they really had it figured out, and then they drafted Paris Campbell and Michael Pittman in back-to-back years, and I completely lost faith in that franchise. And I'm like, what if the Dolphins do that? What if they have all these great players available and just pick complete low probability duds instead?
Definitely.
That could happen. I know that the Bengals already have good players on their roster. So it was kind of a bird in hand versus two in the bush.
Kind of interesting when you juxtapose the two. Tua is known just for having multiple good years, and Burrow's only had 1 year, but Burrow's landing spot's super known. And Tua, you can only go up with Tua, but just because you have that high ceiling of being able to go up doesn't mean you're going to be able to fill up the ceiling. So definitely agree there. Just kind of wrapping up kind of the bulletproof talk here.
Well, hold on a second. I want to ask you a question. How do you feel about Justin Herbert?
Oh my, Justin Herbert? You mean Mitch Trubisky?
That's exactly what I keep thinking. Is he looks exactly like all these guys: Daniel Jones, Josh Allen, Mitch Trubisky, Blake Bortles. He looks exactly like those guys. And at first, I was just completely writing him off, like I don't want anything to do with him. But then when you look at those guys, they'll produce fantasy points, just not for very long. I was like, maybe he's not a bad player to take at the end of the first round in the Superflex League. He's there. I didn't get him anywhere, but I was like, you know what? There's kind of an archetype here that big physical or big athletic quarterbacks that aren't very good at throwing the ball can score points still. And then he landed in LA with the Chargers, probably a better supporting, well, maybe not better, but probably pretty darn close to the Bengals in terms of quality supporting cast. So I don't know. I'm intrigued by Justin Herbert in the next 3 years. And then I want nothing to do with him after that.
One, I don't appreciate the Daniel Jones slander. He's one of my breakout picks for at least this season. Him and Drew Lock I like a lot. So I don't appreciate the Daniel Jones slander. But that's totally okay. But Justin Herbert's interesting because I remember, not that Mahomes got similar hate too. Obviously, Mahomes, they're kind of both raw prospects is kind of like the interesting thing. So the Chargers, I have no faith. The Chargers have always been crap. I feel like as bad as Philip Rivers was this year, he carried that franchise on their back for a while, and LaDainian Tomlinson obviously helped out there too. I want to give you a fun fact back since we're talking about Herbert. You know how big of an arm everyone's talking about, like how good he's going to be, like Mike Williams. Justin Herbert at Oregon threw screen passes 25% of the time. Brett Coleman talked about it. That's like 9% higher than the next quarterback eligible for the draft. That was more than Tua, who does a lot of screens, more than Burrell, who does a lot of screens. So everyone's like, oh my God, Mike Williams is going to be so good. I know you're not a Mike Williams guy, but it's just kind of like, no, he has this huge arm in the freaking Oregon 4-year senior year, didn't improve at all. He's still doing screens because they don't trust him to put the ball downfield accurately. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't know he threw 25% of his passes screens. That's probably good news for Austin Eckler.
I don't remember It was actually, that's interesting though, because their running back only had 14 receptions. So I think it was actually a lot of wide receiver screens. I'm worried about
Yeah.
Eckler. You're not an Eckler guy. Nothing you've said in this 40 minutes of this podcast is going to tell me you're an Eckler guy. So I don't even need to ask. But I'm concerned about Eckler. If they're not going to check down to him as much, especially if they're rocking a Tyrod half the season and that offense isn't as good. Yeah, I'm Eckler.
I'm pretty well out on all the Chargers right now. Even Keenan Allen, whom I love, I'm trying to sell him.
Rookie quarterbacks.
Henry, who I think is one of the best tight ends in football, I am selling. I just want nothing to do with a Justin Herbert-led passing attack. I do not think he's good news for the pass catchers.
I actually had one more question here, because on this podcast, obviously I have two co-hosts who aren't with me tonight, Trent and Sutton, right? They're both kind of big on Michael Pittman here. And I'm kind of in my lone corner being like, the breakout age, man, that scares me. We've seen this with like Hakeem Butler. Obviously, he was thrown out the window entirely when he was drafted day 3. But so can you help a brother out and tell me why they shouldn't have Michael Pittman in their top 6? Rookie draft,
in their top 6? Yeah, they definitely shouldn't. That's insane. Hard pass. He never, I don't even think he met the regression line even as a senior. I don't think he ever had an above average season in college.
I can look it up for you. But okay, that's what I'm saying. I'm like, honestly, USC wide receivers haven't been that bad though. So if there is one guy with a low breakout age, maybe Michael Pittman's that guy, but
I'm not I don't so when I'm looking at teammates, I still want the guy that dominated. I don't want Henry Ruggs, even though he played with good players, because he proved that he isn't as good as those good players. So what are the chances that he's actually better than the good players in the NFL? I don't know. Maybe he is, but he hasn't proven that he is.
Exactly.
Whereas someone like Jerry Jeudy that absolutely dominated as a 19-year-old with all those same players is he came out and crushed everyone else in the passing game that year. And then he did it at 18. He was good, not great. And then even last year, he was good, not great. So it was this is crazy. Henry Ruggs as a 19, I think? He was playing with Irv Smith. Oh, maybe they were a little older. Him and Irv Smith played together at the same time at Alabama. And Irv Smith had 4 receiving yards less than Henry Ruggs as a tight end. It just doesn't make sense. So to Michael Pittman, if he can't even break the average once in his entire college career, he's just probably not that good.
So I have the results are in. I pulled them out here on my phone. I highly doubt I can get it to focus. Probably not. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so he
just got there for his last 2.
Is he below or is he actually over?
So for his age 20 season, he's just below it. I assume we're going for the center of the dot here. If that's the case, just below it. And for his final season, he just did it. Average of average.
He crossed the line.
A second. So I was curious. You're right. I actually didn't know his year 20 was super close. So respect there. I don't think we both knew that, but yeah.
So here's the thing. Just one more thing on this. If you're looking at age 20 plus breakout ages, the ones that are good usually didn't play until they were 20. If you look at Calvin Ridley, Kenny Golladay, Cooper Kupp, AJ Green, Michael Gallup, all those guys are age 20 plus breakouts. None of them played at 18 or 19. So they dominated the second they got on the field. They just didn't get on the field until they were 20. The guys with age 20 breakouts that played when they were 18 and 19 are a minefield of NFL.
So no Brandon Ayuk for you either, even though he's with Kyle Shanahan?
No.
I really wish they're here right now. I think you're the champion I need in my corner. Jeez. Yeah, I mean, Jerry Jeudy, I mean, he was kind of interesting from the fact that he kind of regressed this year from a market share of yard standpoint. I kind of want to transition here into our next segment with that. I believe Can you kind of give me analysis, first of all, about Jerry Jeudy and if we should be worried about him and his profile? But second of all, how do we kind of digest the Broncos offense now with them adding KJ Hamler, Jerry Jeudy?
I'm writing the conclusion on an article about this.
Okay, well, you don't have to give too much away if you don't
probably
want
after
to.
we get off the podcast. No, we can talk about it. It's going to hit soon, I hope. Basically, when I'm looking at how to project an offense, I slot in the best player first, and then I slot in the next best player, and then the next best player, and that way, I don't start from the worst players and say, well, they're going to get a little bit. So when we're looking at the best player, and the other thing that factors in here is history. So Cortland Sutton, as a rookie, put up a reasonable yards per run. He put up a good target share, about like an above average rookie target share. And then as a sophomore, he had the 8th highest target share in the league. Target share is super consistent year over year. Once a player is established, they don't really change more than like 3% on their target share. So if he had a 26% target share, it's pretty unlikely that he's going to drop to like 20%. He's probably going to stay around 23. The issue with the projection, though, is that he's not established. He only had 1 year of that crazy high target share. So we don't really know, but given the fact he's been above average as a rookie and then well above average, terrific as a sophomore in terms of target share, he's probably going to keep getting a big workload, probably in the 23 to 25% range. Then we look at Noah Fant, and I was actually just talking to the patrons about this today, or yesterday maybe. Noah Fant does not have a not elite data point that I can find. He had an elite profile. He's one of the probably top 3 prospects at tight end. He's probably the number 2 prospect at tight end in like the last decade. The only one that I think is better is Hawkinson, and I'm not even sure that I think Hawkinson's better. I have them neck and neck. I've always had them neck and neck. I think they're both terrific. But Noah Fant had an elite prospect profile. He has elite athleticism. He came into the NFL as a rookie and put up a top 6 receiving line since 2000 with a 13.9% target share. The only rookie wide receiver the only rookie tight end that I can think of at that time that was higher is Evan Engram, who had about a 20% target share when everyone on the team died. That was the year Odell Beckham Jr. got hurt in like week 2 or 3 or something, and Sterling Shepard missed a bunch of time, and he was the only guy left. So he had a 20% target share, and that's like it. And Hawkinson had higher. He had 14.1. But there's no data point that I can find for Noah Fant that isn't elite. Even his yards per route run was 1.97. If he was a wide receiver, that's pretty damn terrific. Like, there's just no data point that isn't elite. So I have no reason to believe that Noah Fant isn't elite. In saying that, I can't see a reason in which he doesn't have at least an 18 to 20% target share as a tight end next year, which leaves us with 2 players commanding like half the targets already. Then we have Melvin Gordon and Philip Lindsay out of the backfield, which Melvin Gordon's going to get his. Lindsay might not get very many targets just as a result of playing behind Melvin Gordon, which leaves us with Jerry Jeudy probably as a rookie. Like, I just never project much as a rookie anyway, but an average first-round pick, I think, has about a 14 to 15% target share as a rookie. So he's probably going to be around there. And then there's just not a ceiling there after that. He'll probably be around a 20% on a go-forward basis until one of those other players goes away, either via injury or trade or what have you. Which a 20% target share is good. It's not bad, but it doesn't give you a ceiling in which you're winning fantasy leagues because of Jerry Jeudy. He's just another guy in that wave of wide receiver 2-3 production. Like, his production will matter. He will be a starter, but he will be replaceable in your starting lineup. You'll be able to get a Marvin Jones for a 3rd round pick that will produce roughly the same as Jerry Jeudy.
Yeah. I definitely get where you're coming from there, because Drew Lock isn't proven too. Like, maybe if there's more like a Kirk Cousins who's thrown for all these yards in the past, or just a quarterback in general who's done it. Drew Lock hasn't done it either. So Drew Lock has such a wide range of outcomes. He could genuinely finish as a top 3 fantasy quarterback this season. Maybe it's in his projections, but could also put up poo-poo.
Yeah. I was going to say the thing with Drew Lock is we have a crazy small sample of like 5 games in which his efficiency metrics aren't great. They're like he was okay. He wasn't great. And then we have a prospect profile that was also not great. And it's like, wow, I don't know that we can ever expect Drew Lock to be great if we have 2 data points that do not scream elite quarterback. And if you're looking for quality fantasy production, like say the LA Rams in 2018 when Cooks, Woods, and Kupp were all top 24 wide receivers, well, Goff passed for like 4,500 plus yards that year. You need a huge passer to support 3 quality
That's
receivers.
A great point.
Mm-hmm. And Noah Fant is going to be, in my opinion anyway, an elite tight end. And if he's not elite, he's still going to be damn good. So he's going to be in the 18 to 23% target share range as well. So if you're betting on Jerry Jeudy to be a wide receiver 1, you're betting on one of these other guys that have already shown more to fail. And that's just not something I would ever do.
Speaking of failing, let's move on here to something that's going to make me cry. This guy kind of right here spent like 35 hours on an N'Keal Harry fantasy football breakdown video. Now for Drew, who hyped him up to me a year before just to tell me he's punting all his Harry shares. Why are you doing this to me?
I have punted all my Harry shares. I think I only have 1 left.
Jeez. Oh my god. I don't have many left either. I sold one the other day. I sold one in a late 2021 first for Cooper Kupp, and I felt pretty okay about that one.
That's pretty good. I like that.
Right?
So N'Keal Harry, obviously, so part of like ADP trends is looking at players that face plant, right? If the whole community is down on a player and they drop his ADP after a rookie season, that means he was really bad. When we look at the list of players that busted for ADP, like lost more than a round of startup ADP after the rookie year, it is littered with absolute busts. There's Demaryius Thomas, and that's it. Like, there's just not very many good. Oh, that's not true. Tyler Boyd also has emerged as a quality.
Well, not to cut you off, but wasn't it like 4 out of 88? You've posted about this before. I remember the number. It wasn't pretty.
Yeah. I don't remember the specific number, but it's really, really bad. And N'Keal Harry falls into that category. And then when we look at like his efficiency metrics, like yards per route run, he was atrocious with like 0.98 yards per route run. The good wide receivers usually have 2+, like the good rookie wide receivers. When I was looking at other players that I liked that didn't work out, Corey Davis is the one that comes to mind. When you look at Corey Davis's yards per route run as a rookie, he was at like 1.2 or something along those lines. Really, really bad. So it was like, well, you know what? It didn't work out for Corey Davis, or it hasn't yet anyway. I'm not betting on Corey Davis anymore. It's just best to get out from under N'Keal Harry right now. If he's great, we missed one. Oh well, we'll live. If he's not great, thank goodness we got out. And there's just a really long history of players that show up with good prospect profiles, even that flunk year 1 that just never recover.
Yeah.
So I'm on Harry.
That's such maybe that's your most unique take out of all, but maybe other than Cam Akers 101 that you kind of have as a data analyst, because everybody else who likes to break out age their market share of yards, from my knowledge at least, they're all like, let's give Harry another year. It's just a rookie. So I mean, it breaks my heart here. I'm kind of curious about this because I remember when we were talking when we did our interview probably last year by now. Now look at us. Now we have face cams and nice mics, but who would have thought?
Well, you have a nice mic. I don't know.
I was like $25 in there too. You only had like 1,000. We've both kind of grown looking back, but anyways, I remember you were kind of telling me that these busts. It's kind of funny because these busts you brought up all had separation problems, like Devontae Parker, who's actually now funnily maybe hit to some models. Josh Doxson. All those guys kind of had separation problems, and you sold me on it. You were like, Harry, those guys had skewed dominator ratings. You pull up Harry's market share of yards, you pull up his dominator rating. It was all just consistently there. Blah blah blah. I'm not saying this to be an ass, but my point is, how are you going to look at? Are you changing your process at all after seeing this bust? Are you taking market share of yards at less value, or do you think just misses happen? I assume that's where you're gonna go. Yeah,
misses happen. It's analytics. Like, I've never even seen N'Keal Harry play football before. My take was in no way about is he a good football player. It was he is a high probability hit based on what he did in college, based on his size, his athleticism, and his production in college. Everyone who looks like him hit, so he's probably gonna hit. And then we now have a new data point that says everyone who looks like him doesn't hit anymore because he flunked year one so badly. So, like, it's just a matter of playing probabilities.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's all that it is.
Makes sense too, definitely. Yeah.
And like the guys you mentioned, like Devontae Parker and Josh Doxson, they just never dominated in college. Like, everyone who doesn't dominate in college doesn't hit. That's just
most
how
of the
it
time,
is.
100%. So I'm curious if you ever have extra time on your hands. I'm curious though if we could cross reference of those 88 or whatever wide receivers that busted to see, and the ones who hit, and kind of cross reference to see, match them with Harry's profile to see maybe it's not actually a 4 out of 88 chance of hitting. Maybe it's a little bit less. I'm curious if you ever have time. You kind of already did the thread on it, or if anybody listening. Honestly, I don't want to put that on Drew.
I think Mike Lou did something like that. He looked at College Dominator across the list, and he said it's still really bad.
All right, maybe I'll send him a message then.
I don't use College Dominator, but it's a good proxy for college production. It's just not the best one in my opinion.
Around, maybe I'll do it. What else is there to do, Madden? No, but awesome.
For sure.
Okay, I kind of want to move on here to some topics here. I was trying to talk about this guy earlier, and we never got around to it. T. Higgins. I mean, you talk about how you love the Bengals wide receiver core, and I feel like it's a seamless transition. One guy who can't separate on film to the other guy who can't separate on film. I mean, those Nick Whalens of the world, all these, the Dynasty nerds, all these film guys are probably mad at us for talking about these separationless guys, but what I mean, I already know what you like about T. Higgins. He's got it all, but tell the viewers and listeners what he's got.
Well, he's a giant, 6'4", 218, I think, if I'm going off memory, somewhere thereabouts. He didn't run real fast. He ran a 4.59 or a 4.6, somewhere in that neighborhood. But that doesn't really matter. I don't really care about wide receiver athleticism. It's like the least impactful thing I look at with wide receivers. What I really look at with wide receivers is, did they produce? Which T. Higgins, if you pull him up on your market share app, he doesn't look that good. But the issue with T. Higgins is that his production requires a ton of context. T. Higgins had like 8 targets in the second half of the entire season in last season. He was on the bench in the second half because they were winning so much. He did what he did in half the games. It's insane. He had like a 43% market share in the first half of games and like a 0.9% in the second half of games. So when you do that at a place like Clemson, that really stands out to me. Clemson, even their bad players are still high recruits. Like, it's just crazy that he was that dominant when the games mattered at Clemson. And then when we look at so when I'm looking for elite wide receivers, I'm either looking for big guys or I'm looking for elite athleticism. Elite athleticism guys are guys like DJ Moore and Odell Beckham Jr. They weren't big by any stretch. They're not small guys, but they're average sized. But they're absolutely elite across the board when it comes to athleticism. That's the kind of guys I'm looking for in that case. And they were dominant college producers. The other side of the coin is the big guys. The big X receivers still tend to be high volume receivers. So T. Higgins is that kind of style of player. He's the big X receiver that's going to catch jump balls if he gets them thrown to him, which Burrell showed that he's a gunslinger last year. no doubts that Burrell is going to push the ball down the field. And when he does that, T. Higgins is going to be his primary target once A.J. Green retires.
Yeah, I mean, Burrow, yeah,
or
definitely.
moves on.
I mean, under the franchise tag, so he could be gone in a year. Burrow to, Higgins, that's kind of salivating. So I definitely think that landing spot helped them out. I thought they're going to go like offensive line, or there's Denzel Mims rumors. Thank God for Drew. He didn't have to, pound the desk. Definitely.
Yeah, no, it's I didn't have Higgins ranked this highly. I have him as my wide receiver 2 right now, and I did not have him that highly before the draft. I moved him up when he landed in Cincinnati because I just felt like Burrow is probably really good, and I want the guy that is going to get the bulk of the targets in that offense. They don't have a tight end. They probably maybe they'll draft a tight end, who knows? But they don't have one right now. They have a great slot receiver, and then they have pretty much nothing else. T. Higgins is a good player, I thought, and when he landed in that landing spot, I was like, you know what? I don't care if he doesn't produce year 1. None of these other guys are going to put up fantasy starter seasons anyway. So I'm playing for year 2, and in year 2, he could be the guy who has the big 25% workload.
Definitely. Just kind of quickly here, we don't need to spend too much time on this question. I don't think this needs to get broken down too much. But okay, so there's 4 kind of main fantasy positions, right? The quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, right? Can you name one of your biggest rebounds or someone who you think is a value? Maybe it's kind of open-ended question. At each position, 1 per position. You're on the clock.
Sure. At quarterback, it's Baker Mayfield. I actually had him as a generational prospect. I thought he is basically a surefire Hall of Famer as a prospect. His rookie year, he set the record for passing touchdowns. He was absolutely on track for the Hall of Fame after year 1, and then year 2 happened, and now I'm a little bit sad. But his supporting cast is still elite. They have a new coach. Apparently, a lot of the issues were play calling and team chemistry. Hopefully, that is solved this year. He's still the same player. And the other thing with last year is Odell Beckham Jr. played most of the year, but he played with a hernia, which just can't be very good in terms of playing a physical sport. And they played one of the toughest pass defenses of the strength of schedule last year. It's like the deck was stacked against the Browns last year in terms of the passing game, not to mention, the Freddie Kitchen disaster, etc. So I'm going to go with Baker. Sorry, I wasn't supposed to be long-winded.
I knew the quarterback was going to be long-winded. I already knew it was Baker, too. I know you too well.
Very true. Okay, so running back, my bounce-back running back is James Conner. James Conner still had 14.8 points per game last year. He still commanded a large workload. He is a good running back. I don't think he's an elite running back by any stretch, but I absolutely think he's going to be a borderline RB1 this year. Even with that atrocious quarterback play last year, he was RB14, if I recall correctly. That's insane. And he missed parts of 2 different games, I believe. He was out early. He was a great producer last year. The year before, he was obviously fantastic. They didn't add anyone of consequence. I think it's going to go right back to 2018 level James Conner. Then for wide receiver is my guy, Cristian Kirk, man. Cristian Kirk this is another guy that we just don't have a data point that isn't good on. He was terrific in college. He broke out at 18. He played with not a great player, but he played with Josh Reynolds in college, who was a 4th-round pick. Dominated a 4th-round pick. When faced with NFL competition in college, he beat it. Then when he got to Arizona, he had over 2 yards per route run with Josh Rosen at quarterback. That's impossible to do. I have no idea how he did that as a rookie. It was fantastic. It was low volume. He only had, I forget how many yards he had. He got hurt as well. But from an efficiency standpoint, when you have an inefficient quarterback throwing to you and still putting up efficient numbers, it just doesn't make sense. And then last year, he played most of the year with a high ankle sprain and yet still commanded a 25 or 24.8% target share. That's incredible. His rookie year was 20%, also incredible. We don't have a bad data point on Cristian Kirk. Now we have another terrific quarterback in Kyler Murray, who is going into year 2, and that offense is going to be lights out. Cristian Kirk is probably going to be that guy that is like the best number 2 wide receiver in fantasy football. I honestly think he has an outside shot at wide receiver 1 numbers if Kyler is as good as we think, or as good as I think he is. So Cristian Kirk's my guy. And then at tight end, I don't really have a buy low tight end that I love right now. I'm all in on Hawkinson and Noah Fant, Evan Engram. Give me any of those 3 guys. If I had to pick a later one, it would probably be Irv Smith, who had a strong rookie year. And I don't love him as a prospect, though. Like he's not somebody that really moved the needle for me. He just had a good rookie year. If you want a really deep tight end, I'm going to go with Chris Herndon, who had a lights out rookie year.
Okay.
I still think there's hope there, and he's almost free. So he's my late round tight end.
I have him in our fantasy favor fan league, so hopefully you're right. My final question here for you, kind of just dynasty fantasy football related, is just kind of like, so I have a hard time valuing these guys, so maybe you can help me. So there's guys with kind of like questionable futures, especially at the running back position, right? Derrick Henry's on a franchise tag. Kenyon Drake's on a transition tag. Aaron Jones is a free agent next year, and they drafted A.J. Dillon in the 2nd round. Maybe not your favorite guy, but that's high draft capital. That probably matters for his future.
Oh yeah, absolutely,
and then,
it does.
Even Austin Eckler signed a pretty lucrative contract. They added nobody, but he's also a super light satellite back to just like the way he plays, how built he is. I don't know if he falls in that category for you. I know he doesn't for some, but for me, he does. So with all these players with questionable futures, how do you kind of value them?
I sold them all. Yeah, there's like running back is fleeting, right? Like we just don't have running backs, especially non-elite running backs. We just don't have them around for very long. None of those guys, in my opinion, are elite ones, and they're all on the downside of their career at this point. If I can move on from them, like Derrick Henry, I have been pounding the table that we should be selling him since the trade deadline last year. Like he's just not going to do this again. This is a one-off season. It's so unlikely that he does this again that you just need to get out. And at that time, you could get a lot for him because he was running back 5, I think, at the end of the year last year. He was dominating. You could have got a ton for him. If you can get any of the rookie wide receiver or rookie running backs, the big 5, I would take all of them over any of those guys you listed. Obviously, Derrick Henry is probably the one that's closest for most people. I think he's actually probably going ahead of a few of the other guys, a few of the rookies in ADP, so you might be able to get one for him. Austin Eckler, I think that offense is just going to be a train wreck this year. So when you have what is he, about 26 or so?
Yeah.
When you have a 26-year-old running back that isn't producing this year or isn't going to produce at a level that matters, then why would you want him? Sell him for a future first, then go get Sony Michel, who's probably not going to be very good this year either, but he's going to be a flex play at worst, just based on pure volume. Austin Eckler is probably going to be a running back 20. Like, there's not a big difference between running back 31 and running back 20. They're all in the same range. And Aaron Jones is a massive sell just based on touchdown regression. He was somewhere around running back 18 or 20 in opportunity share, but led the league in touchdowns. It's obvious that that's not going to continue. The argument, I think, is that he can regress and still be good, and he can regress and still be good, but he wasn't valued as being regressed and still be good. He was being valued around running back 10.
Too high.
Which, with with running back 18 or 20 opportunity share, running back 10 was just way too high. And then now that they drafted a second round running back, it's like, and one that's AJ Dillon, like the guy's 240 some pounds. What do you think they're going to do with him? Maybe run him at the goal line? I bet that might be a thing they might do with a 240 pound running back. Want
some wheel routes with them, try to.
Yeah, like a guy, they drafted a running back that doesn't catch passes and is 240 pounds. What do most teams do with 240 pound running backs? They use them at the goal line. So they even split the goal line touches between Aaron Jones and AJ Dillon. That's a terrifying outcome for Aaron Jones.
Aaron Jones was efficient at it, but opportunity matters in fantasy football. We saw it with Fournette, maybe not the most efficient football player, especially in his reception, receiving yards per reception, but he got enough volume there, and he was a beast with only 3 touchdowns. So yeah, volume matters. I think we both agree on that matter.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, everything on my rankings is based around volume, projected volume, and then the good players get a bump. So I think a player is good and they're going to get projected volume. Well, they're going to be ranked a hell of a lot higher than a player that I think is just going to get projected volume.
Yeah, definitely. So I want to move on here to my kind of final fantasy football question that doesn't relate to you. Why do data and analytics matter? I have a co-host who's very anti-analytics. He doesn't get breakout age at all. He's like, okay, why don't you use breakout age for running backs then? And that's all due respect to him. We all have our own processes. He's a big film guy. But why should fantasy analysts use analytics like you use and data like you use in their kind of digestion of ranking players?
Because it matters. Because you can look, like, just tell him to list all the guys that he had as bust, or that he liked that busted, and then put him through the bulletproof process. It's almost guaranteed that they busted because they didn't produce in college, or they were scrawny, or they were a 0th percentile athlete, or they were a 4th round pick or later. Like, every one of those busts probably fits that type of issue. I went through, I don't know if you recall, a few months ago, maybe a prominent film analyst had posted about, that would be the one, posted about how we shouldn't have an opinion on his running or his wide receiver rankings because he watched more film than us and he wrote more articles than us and so on and so forth. And which is fair. Like, the guy works hard. There's no question about that. I actually think he's a pretty decent film analyst, but I had interacted with him once before somebody asked him why he doesn't use breakout age or any production metrics. He said, well, he doesn't need them. And I had commented that I would love to see his rankings so that I could compare to see if he doesn't need them. And he did not reply. And then this time, I don't remember exactly how it came up, but basically I was like, yeah, who are your top receivers in 2019 or 2018 or whatever it was? And then he listed his top 7 or 8 or something like that. And then I went through all the guys that busted, and every one of them did not produce in college. I was like, this isn't hard. Like, just look at the guys that you missed and then see if they produce. And if they didn't, then maybe you should start using production metrics. Like, it's just look at your process, figure out who you're missing on, and then see if you can find similar issues.
And I do think analytics alone and film alone bring some problems, right? But when you combine them, I think that's your best analysis, like potential analysis, when you use both of them. Do you agree with that, or do you disagree with that?
Oh, absolutely, I agree with that. So we were having this debate about Jonathan Taylor being generational today. And my argument is that Jonathan Taylor is not generational because he was a 2nd round pick. And I was told that he was only a 2nd round pick because RBs don't matter. And I was like, he just wasn't graded as a high 1st round pick. Like, when you look at NFL.com's prospect rates, which are film based, he wasn't graded where the other top 5 picks are graded. It wasn't a matter of him being drafted in 2020 and it being RBs don't matter year. It was that he just didn't grade well enough. So I treat draft capital almost as a film grade as much as an opportunity driver. I know that draft capital drives opportunity, but I think it's also like NFL scouting departments and GMs film grades on
that
players.
definitely makes sense there. So I'm curious, do you have any future projects coming up? Just working on some articles?
No real project, just trying to get some of these bulletproof prospect profiles out. And that's the bulk of my projects right now. I had intended to get out about 15 of them before the NFL draft, and then this pandemic erupted, and I suddenly was working from home with 2 kids and just didn't have time to write anymore. So hoping to make some time to do some more writing, get some of those articles onto DLF.
Awesome. Okay, so where can we find those bulletproof articles? I believe on your Patreon?
No, all the bulletproof all my articles for the most part are on Dynasty League Football. My Patreon is my rankings. I put all my rankings on Patreon. And then I also do like a group chat for the patrons where we basically talk about football, whatever they want to talk about.
It's pretty fun. So definitely check that out. If you want links to any of those, I'm going to try to put them in the description. You can also check out Drew's Twitter at DFBeanCounter. And I think the Patreon's in your bio, right? Or it's pinned. It'll definitely be one of the two. So just check it out. It'll be right there. So we've been doing this for like an hour and like 15 minutes. Okay. And I've had such a blast here, but the brain only will probably remember like 30% of like what we just talked about. I'm probably going to forget like 70% of it. I need to rewatch it. Okay. So what's kind of your one takeaway? What should I take away from this podcast episode? Or like a listener should take away?
What should you take away from this podcast? You should take away that Noah Fant is an elite tight end. We have no non-elite data points. He's elite. There's no other way around it.
Okay. I did not expect you to say that. I thought you were going to go a little more broad, but we have a Noah Fant enthusiast, and I appreciate it. Definitely. So my final question here for you then is, where can I find you once again if I want to check you and your workout?
I'm on Twitter at DFBeanCounter, and then I am on. I do articles on Dynasty League Football and rankings on Patreon.
Awesome. So thank you so much for your time today, Drew. I appreciate it. I've seen it go from sunny outside to dark outside. So definitely means that we've had a great talk here. So thank you so much for coming on. I hope to have you on maybe sometime in the future. If you'd love to come on, I'd love to have you again. So thank you so much for spending your time here with me.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me,
For
Matt.
our listeners and viewers, I hope you remember to have a fantastic rest of your day, night, whenever you're listening. It's quarantine season, weird sleep schedules, right? So take care. Remember to subscribe, leave a rating on podcast platforms, and have a like I said, take care.